If you missed my last video, I've been watching The Lord of the Rings for the first time. My last video was about the Fellowship of the Ring, which you can watch by clicking there. Today, I will be talking about The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. However, first, I'd like to address this comment right here by handcuffing my arms behind my back, so that way, I don't make so many hand gestures. As you can see, I'm handcuffed. Anyway, let's talk about Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. Okay, just kidding. I'm not gonna do the whole video with my hands behind my back. But seriously though, I could probably make an at least 20-minute compilation video of every time I went like this. Anyway, my insane amount of hand gestures set aside, let's talk about The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. I want to start off by talking about two characters who are probably the two most interesting characters in the series so far. Gollum, or Smeagol, and Gandalf. So first, let's talk about Gollum. We got to see him a little bit in the Fellowship of the Ring, but we really get introduced to him in this movie. And I have to say, he quickly became one of my favorite characters. I found the whole Gollum-Smeagol split personality thing really sad, but also interesting. And I really like how Frodo calls him Smeagol throughout the whole movie.
Smeagol?
It shows that Frodo empathizes with him and that he still sees the good in him, as opposed to Sam, who calls him Gollum throughout the whole movie and doesn't trust him. I want to highlight one of my favorite scenes from the movie that I think perfectly represents the battle between Gollum and Smeagol. The scene starts actually showing him turn his head to both sides. This shows that both personalities are in the same body. But by the end of the scene, it just cuts back and forth between each personality, giving the effect that there's actually two separate people or creatures having the conversation. This shows the splitting of the two personalities and ends with Smeagol gaining full control over the body. However, later at the end of the movie, this scene is mirrored by one continuous shot of Gollum coming back and plotting with Smeagol to take the ring and kill Frodo and Sam. I really hope that in Return of the King, Smeagol redeems himself and officially turns back to good. His story is really sad, and I really hope that his character has a happy ending. Anyway, I need to handcuff my hands again, but let's get into Gandalf. Gandalf died in the previous movie, The Fellowship of the Ring, but like I said in that video, I knew that he comes back somehow. The movie starts with showing Gandalf's death again, but instead of following the rest of the Fellowship like we did in the last movie, we see Gandalf as he's falling. And this does a good job of foreshadowing that he's going to be coming back later in the movie. So the actual reveal that Gandalf's still alive, I think was really well executed. They set it up so you're supposed to think that it's Saruman, who I somehow haven't talked about yet, but then it's revealed that it's Gandalf. Apparently he didn't die from falling, but he ended up on a mountain fighting the Balrog. So on top of the mountain, he killed the Balrog, but then he died. However, he was brought back to finish his task of helping defeat Saruman. And also when he came back, he became the White Wizard, the highest level of wizard. This title of the White Wizard was previously given to Saruman, and it was supposed to represent the purest and the leader of the wizards. However, Saruman turned evil and joined Sauron, so I think he is still technically the White Wizard, but Gandalf more exemplified those traits, so he became the White Wizard. He was what Saruman was supposed to be, what the White Wizard is supposed to be. So this is why now he is Gandalf the White, instead of previously Gandalf the Grey.
I am Gandalf the White.
Alright. Now let's talk about Aragorn. Aragorn was already my favorite character from the last movie, but this movie did the impossible and just bumped that up even more. He is so awesome. One of my favorite moments from him is when he throws Gimli into the crowd of orcs on the bridge, and then they both just start tearing a whole bunch of them apart. Somebody really needs to put the Avengers theme to that, because that is just such an epic moment. I do have to say though, I'm not really sure what the whole love triangle-ish thing is between Aragorn, Arwen, and Eowyn. I feel like the Aragorn and Arwen relationship wasn't really developed enough in the last movies, so that made it so I wasn't sure how to feel about the Aragorn and Eowyn thing. That whole thing is just kind of weird to me, but I guess we'll have to see what happens with that in the next movie. Before I say my final thoughts, I want to talk about the two themes that I noticed in this movie. There's actually a main primary theme and a secondary side theme. The main theme is maintaining hope in the darkest of times. And it's actually quite fitting for the current state of the world. You have Frodo and Sam having trouble on their quest to destroy the ring and feeling like they can't do it. Rohan being greatly outnumbered against the orcs. Smeagol desperately trying to be free from Gollum. But despite all of this, the odds stacked against them, they still maintain hope. Aragorn, even though everybody's saying that it's hopeless, still remains hope and says,
There is always hope.
Sam gives a whole speech to Frodo at the end of the movie literally about maintaining hope in the darkest of times.
Folk in those stories Had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't. They kept going because they were holding on to something. What are we holding on to, Sam? That there's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for.
And Smeagol, well, Smeagol doesn't maintain hope. He gives into the darkness. But like I said earlier, I really hope that in The Return of the King, he turns good again. And this brings us to the side theme. The importance of fighting for what's right, even if you're not in the line of fire. The tree creatures, as I like to call them, the army of Groots, don't want to help in the fight against Saruman at first. But they decide to once Treebeard sees that Saruman has killed many of his friends and he is directly affected. And the elves initially don't want to help Rohan, but they do eventually because that's the right thing to do, even though they aren't directly affected. Now I want to say my final thoughts on The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers. I think I actually like this one more than the first one. That's probably because this one had the advantage that I was already familiar with the world and the characters. Where the first one needed to get me introduced to the world and all of the characters, this one I was able to jump right in and enjoy the story without needing all the context explained to me. I already knew and loved the characters in the story, where the first one needed to win me over on them. Also, like the first one, I noticed a lot of similarities to Star Wars, specifically The Empire Strikes Back. I am now convinced that George Lucas took a lot of information from the Lord of the Rings books when writing Star Wars. You have the group split up for two different journeys in this one. You have the return of the old wise mentor. You have the introduction of a small creature who helps the main protagonist on his journey and talks weird. It's a bit weird to compare Yoda to Gollum/Smeagol, but that's just how it worked out. You have the smaller villain who used to be a good guy and a friend of the wise mentor but turned evil. And you have the main villain who I guess isn't really introduced until the third movie and has been pulling the strings the whole time. Anyway, like I said earlier, I really enjoyed Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers. And I can't wait to watch the finale, The Return of the King, so stay tuned for the next video for that. Anyway, please comment your thoughts below. And remember to like, subscribe, and check out some of my other videos. With that said, that's a wrap.